"She took it?" I whispered, staring into the velvet drawer. Empty. Perfect indentation. No watch. Then I saw Sarah glance at David and he smirked. My grandfather's gold pocket watch, the one he made me swear to keep in the bloodline, was gone, just hours after his funeral. But they weren't done. At the meeting that afternoon, they pushed to have it auctioned off, claimed it was just fair value. And when I demanded security footage, they grinned and said, "Oh, that deletes in 2 weeks." They knew the system, knew exactly how to stall me. What they didn't know? Grandpa taught me everything, including where the vault camera's second backup gets flagged, automatically. I didn't tell them I had the footage. I just watched and waited, because in 27 days, they'd be ruined, and every lie would play on loop. Want to see it? My name is Jason Mercer, and I'm 45 years old. My home office, where I spend most days cataloging estate paperwork, carries the familiar scent of fresh coffee and the furniture polish my grandfather Walter taught me to make. His gold pocket watch sits in its display case on my desk, though my cousins Sarah and David keep hinting it should be shared whenever we meet about the inheritance. I learned everything at grandfather's workbench, including his obsession with documenting details, like the hidden inscription he showed me one quiet afternoon. My fingers brushed the glass case, remembering how he'd say, "A Mercer's word is his compass." Even now, my jaw tightens when I think of Sarah's sugary smile at the last family dinner, her eyes fixed on that watch. But let me start from the beginning. I'd known the funeral would be hard, but nothing prepared me for that first estate meeting 3 days later. You know how some moments just etch themselves into your memory? The lawyer's office had that stark, pine-scented cleanliness that reminded me of hospital waiting rooms. Through the window, autumn leaves scattered across the parking lot, while inside, we scattered into assigned seats around a mahogany conference table. Sarah and David showed up in matching black outfits that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. Their shoes gleamed like they'd been polished that morning, and their smiles had that same artificial shine. I couldn't help but notice how they positioned themselves directly across from me, tag-teaming before we'd even started. "Let's begin," Mr. Patterson, the estate lawyer, said as he adjusted his reading glasses. He had that careful, measured tone lawyers use when they're trying to keep everyone calm. "Walter Mercer's will is fairly straightforward in most aspects." Before he could finish, Sarah leaned forward. "What about personal items?" Her voice had that sugary quality that always set my teeth on edge. "Shouldn't those be considered communal property? For fairness?" I felt my coffee from breakfast turn sour in my stomach. "The pocket watch isn't up for discussion," I said, keeping my voice level. "Grandfather was explicit about it staying in the bloodline. He told me that dozens of times over the years." David's laugh could have cut glass. "Oh, come on, Jason. Everything's up for discussion. That's what probate is for, right, Mr. Patterson?" The lawyer's pen scratched against his legal pad. "I'm noting both the claim and the objection. Probate will resolve disputes based on available documentation." He glanced at me over his glasses. "Do you have anything concrete to support your claim?" "The watch has a unique inscription," I said, pulling out my notebook. My hands were steady as I wrote it down. Word for word, just as grandfather had shown me years ago. I'd memorized those letters like my own name. "Anyone can verify this matches what's engraved inside the case." Sarah's perfectly plucked eyebrows arched. "How sentimental," she said, sharing a look with David that made my jaw clench. "But shouldn't we list it as common property until everything's properly reviewed?" The estate manager, Ms. Thompson, cleared her throat. "We'll be conducting a thorough inventory of the vault contents tomorrow morning. Everything will be photographed and logged in our chain of custody ledger." She passed out typed schedules. "All claimants are welcome to observe." I nodded, though inside I felt the room tilting. Everyone was treating this like some corporate merger, all procedure and protocol. But I could hear grandfather's voice in my head. "A man's word is his bond, Jason. Don't let anyone tell you different." "Excellent," Mr. Patterson said, checking his watch. "Shall we say 9 a.m. tomorrow for the vault inventory?" "We'll be there," David said quickly, and Sarah nodded beside him. "Of course," I said, my voice steady even as my fingers pressed white marks into my palm under the table. They wanted to play it by the book? Fine. I'd document every single detail, just like grandfather taught me. The meeting wrapped up with handshakes and hollow pleasantries. As everyone gathered their things, I watched Sarah run her manicured fingers along the conference table's edge, like she was already measuring for new furniture. The autumn sun caught her diamond ring, throwing sharp little rainbows across the wall. They looked like warning signs. The next morning hit me like a sledgehammer. Even before I pulled into the estate office parking lot, I'd barely slept. spending half the night going through grandfather's old photos, touching the empty space where the watch usually sat in my display case. You ever notice how absence can weigh more than presence? The estate building was one of those squat brick structures that always remind me of Cold War bunkers. Inside, the air conditioning hummed that particular pitch that makes your teeth ache. Miss Thompson was already there, fumbling with a ring of keys that looked heavy enough to anchor a small boat. "Good morning," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. Sarah and David arrived right behind me, coffee cups in hand, dressed like they were heading to a board meeting instead of a vault inventory. "Morning, cousin," Sarah chirped, positioning herself near the clipboard station while David drifted toward the cameras. They had this way of moving that reminded me of chess pieces. Always strategic, always coordinated. The vault door opened with a sound like old bones creaking. Fluorescent lights flickered to life, washing everything in that harsh, institutional glare that makes even gold look cheap. The concrete walls seemed to press in, making the space feel smaller than it was. "Nice collection of antiques," David smirked, elbowing Sarah. She covered her mouth to hide a laugh, but I caught the edge of it. The sound scraped against my nerves like sandpaper. I cleared my throat. "Can we start with the pocket watch?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I'd like to verify its condition first." Ms. Thompson nodded, making a note on her clipboard. "Of course. It should be in the personal effects drawer." She moved to a cabinet against the far wall, running her finger down the label index. The drawer slid open with a metallic whisper. Inside, the velvet lining showed perfect indentations where items had rested, like fossil impressions in stone. But the watch-shaped hollow was empty. Just empty. Have you ever felt silence gather weight? It did then, pressing against my ears until I could hear my own pulse. Ms. Thompson blinked rapidly, checking the index again. Her finger traced down the list twice, 3 times. Each pass made my stomach twist tighter. "Oh my," Sarah breathed, her eyes wide with what looked like practiced surprise. "Could someone have moved it?" David stepped forward, hands spread. "Maybe it got shifted during the initial assessment?" These things happen with so many people involved. The words hit me like ice water. They'd planned this. I could feel it in my bones, see it in the way they wouldn't quite look at me directly. "We need to halt the inventory," Ms. Thompson announced, her professional mask slipping just enough to show concern underneath. "We can't proceed until we've reviewed the access logs and determined what happened. I want to see those logs now." The words came out harder than I meant them to, bouncing off the concrete walls. "And the camera footage. There has to be footage." Ms. Thompson hesitated, then reached for a black binder marked "Security" on a nearby shelf. Behind us, the vault door groaned shut with a hollow finality that seemed to echo my grandfather's voice. "Trust your gut, Jason. When something feels wrong, it usually is." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting strange shadows across Sarah's face as she studied her manicured nails. David had his phone out, thumbs tapping away like nothing important was happening. But I caught them sharing a glance when they thought I wasn't looking. I remembered something else grandfather used to say while we worked in his shop. Patience isn't just about waiting. It's about watching. So I watched. I watched how Sarah's right foot tapped an irregular rhythm against the floor. I watched how David's shoulders tensed when Ms. Thompson mentioned cameras, and I watched their carefully crafted surprise start to crack around the edges. Ms. Thompson laid the security binder on a small metal table, the pages rustling like dead leaves as she opened it. The sound seemed to fill the entire vault, mixing with the hum of the lights and the soft tap of Sarah's heel against concrete. Ms. Thompson spread the access log across the cold metal counter, and my heart sank as I scanned the entries. Every single visit was marked "Family Access." No outside entries, no staff, just us. The handwriting varied between 3 or 4 styles, but they were all properly signed and dated. I ran my finger down the timestamps, and something from the funeral flickered through my mind. That moment when Sarah had excused herself during the eulogy, claiming she felt faint. David following her 10 minutes later, saying he was checking on his sister. The same staggered pattern played out in the log entries. Sarah's signature, then David's, spaced just far enough apart to look natural. "Look here," I said, tapping the page. "These 2 entries." "Oh, those?" Sarah leaned over my shoulder, her perfume too strong in the confined space. "I had to come back twice that day. Forgot my reading glasses the first time." She gave a little laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "You know how scatterbrained grief can make you." David cleared his throat. "Could be a clerical thing, couldn't it? I mean, the staff must handle these items sometimes. For cleaning or whatever. I don't speculate on security matters." Ms. Thompson cut in, closing the binder with a snap. This needs to go through proper channels. Let's take it up with Mr. Peterson. The walk back to the conference room felt like a funeral march. My cousins walked ahead, their whispered conversation just quiet enough that I couldn't make out the words. The sound of their designer shoes clicking against marble echoed off the walls like a metronome counting down time I didn't have. Mr. Peterson was waiting behind his desk, hands folded like a judge about to pass sentence. The morning light through his window cast long shadows across the polished wood. "Ms. Thompson has briefed me on the situation," he said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Unfortunately, these kinds of disputes are common in estate settlements. The process for resolving them is well established, but it does take time." My mouth went dry. How much time? These matters typically require months of documentation, possibly depositions. Months? The word came out sharper than I intended. The watch could be anywhere by then. He held up a hand. "I understand your concern, but there's another factor to consider. The estate vault is scheduled to be sealed in 30 days, at which point all assets will be divided according to the final settlement agreement." The weight of those words pressed against my chest like a vice. 30 days. The watch could vanish forever in 30 days. "And what happens to disputed items?" Sarah asked, all innocence. "They're treated as common property and handled accordingly," Mr. Peterson replied. "Usually through approved auction houses to ensure fair value distribution." I watched my cousins trade glances, saw the slight upturn of their lips. They'd planned this. They knew exactly how long they needed to stall. "We need to preserve evidence," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "Camera footage, access records, everything. I'll send out the appropriate emails." Mr. Peterson nodded, already turning to his computer. "Though I should note that our security system automatically purges footage after 2 weeks unless specifically flagged." Sarah and David stood, straightening their clothes with practiced efficiency. As they passed my chair, David paused. "Prove it," he whispered. Just loud enough for me to hear. Then they were gone, leaving behind only the fading click of heels and the scent of expensive perfume. I pulled out my notebook, the same one I'd used to document every project in Grandfather's workshop, and wrote the number in fresh ink. 30 days. The scratching of my pen seemed to echo in the quiet room, each stroke a reminder of time slipping away. Mr. Peterson's keyboard clicks filled the silence as he drafted emails about evidence preservation. But we both knew what those emails really were. Just more paper in a paper chase that would run out the clock. I headed straight for the security office, my grandfather's voice echoing in my head. "Systems have gaps, son. Find them before they find you." The security suite hummed with electronics, screens showing real-time feeds from around the building. Behind a desk cluttered with coffee cups sat Ted, the lead technician, squinting at monitors. "Need to review some vault footage," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "From the week of the funeral." Ted's fingers stopped typing. "Got a flag number for that request?" "A what?" "Policy requires formal documentation before we can access archived footage." He reached for a thick manual, thumbing through tabbed sections. "Everything needs proper tracking, especially involving the vault area." "But this is about missing property," I said. "The pocket watch. It's documented in the estate inventory." "Sure, but without a flag." Ted trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "Look, here's the thing. Our system auto-deletes recordings after 2 weeks unless they're specifically flagged for retention." The fluorescent lights suddenly felt colder. 2 weeks. I did the math in my head. The funeral was 11 days ago. That meant, we're losing days, I said, leaning forward. "By the time any paperwork clears, those recordings could be gone." "Not my call," Ted shrugged. "Need to go through Ms. Thompson for retroactive flags." I found the estate manager in her office, but she was already shaking her head before I finished explaining. "Without explicit directive from legal, I can't authorize special handling," she said. "There are procedures." The door opened, and Sarah breezed in carrying a tray of coffee cups. David followed with a box of pastries. "Thought everyone could use a pick-me-up," Sarah announced, distributing cups with practiced grace. "Oh, and David was just telling me about that wonderful children's hospital fundraiser coming up. The one you're on the board for, right, Miss Thompson?" I watched the estate manager's professional distance melt as Sarah detailed the substantial donation they were considering. The conversation flowed around me like I wasn't even there, my presence becoming increasingly irrelevant. When I tried redirecting back to the footage issue, Ms. Thompson's smile turned apologetic. "As I was saying, we have to follow proper channels. Mr. Peterson is drafting the preservation request now." I found the lawyer still at his desk, surrounded by stacks of paper. "The 2-week window is closing," I said. "We need to flag those recordings today." I understand your urgency, he replied, adjusting his glasses. But rushing could compromise the whole process. These things take time. Time is exactly what we don't have. I pulled out my notebook, flipping to documentation of vault access patterns. Look at the chain of custody here. If we lose the footage, I appreciate your thoroughness, he cut in, nodding sympathetically. Let me finish drafting this request. We'll submit it through proper channels. My cousins drifted past his open door, David pausing to lean against the frame. Still pushing the camera thing? He shook his head. Come on, Jason. All this sentiment shouldn't override established process. Right, Mr. Peterson? The lawyer mumbled something non-committal, suddenly very interested in his computer screen. I made one last try with Ted in security, hoping logic might prevail. Once that footage is gone, we can't get it. Hey, back. You understand what's at stake here? He spread his hands helplessly. Without a flag, the system does what it's programmed to do. 2 weeks, then it's gone. That's policy. I stared at the wall calendar behind his desk. 3 days until the 2-week mark. After that, any evidence of what happened in that vault would vanish like it never existed. Just like my cousins planned, I realized. They knew exactly how long to stall. Exactly which strings to pull. Every coffee cup and casual chat was deliberate, designed to run out the clock while maintaining perfect deniability. I spent that whole evening hunched over my desk, typing and retyping preservation requests until my eyes burned. The lamp cast a weak circle on stacks of estate documents, policy manuals, and legal templates I'd pulled from online. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I barely noticed. Pursuant to Information Retention Policy Section 4.2, I wrote, regarding prevention of spoliation of potentially relevant evidence. The formal language felt strange in my mouth as I read it back. Part of me wondered what Grandpa would think of all this legal tap dancing. The sound of an incoming email made me jump. It was Peterson, the estate lawyer, confirming he'd submitted my request to both security and Ms. Thompson. His response was textbook non-committal. Receipt acknowledged. Will review according to standard procedures. 5 minutes later, Ms. Thompson's reply landed in my inbox. My heart sank as I opened the attachment. A dense approval matrix, requiring signatures from 3 trustees, 2 lawyers, and the head of security. At the bottom was a note about typical processing time, 3-5 business days. I called Ted in security again, my voice tight. There has to be some way to put a temporary hold on those files, just until the paperwork clears. Listen, Mr. Mercer, he sighed, sounding as tired as I felt. I get asked to bend the rules all the time. Can't do it. Policy exists for a reason. My phone buzzed. The family group chat. Sarah had posted some flowery message about honoring Grandpa's memory by moving forward with grace. David chimed in about letting go of material things. Others added prayer emojis and gentle platitudes. I muted the chat, my stomach churning. They knew exactly what they were doing. Every delay, every proper channel was just running out the clock until those recordings vanished forever. The quiet of my home office pressed in. My eyes drifted to the empty spot where Grandpa's watch used to sit in its leather case. The absence felt physical, like a missing tooth you can't stop probing with your tongue. Patience, Jason. I could almost hear him saying. Honor isn't about winning. It's about doing right. But what good was doing right if the system itself was rigged? If being honorable just meant being naive? I stared at my calendar, counting the days until the 2-week mark. After that, the footage would be gone, taking with it any chance of proving what happened in that vault. The thought settled like lead in my chest. Peterson's last email promised an update first thing tomorrow. But sitting there in the dark, watching the minutes tick by, tomorrow felt very far away. Maybe I'm just not built for this, I whispered to the empty room. Maybe I'm too small to fight them all. The words tasted bitter, but they carried a strange relief, like finally admitting a painful truth. The desk lamp cast my shadow on the wall, hunched and solitary. All those lessons about integrity, about standing up for what's right, they hadn't prepared me for this slow suffocation by paperwork and policy, for watching truth die by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts, while smiling faces served coffee and talked about proper procedures. My phone buzzed again, probably more family chat messages about healing and moving on. I left it face down on the desk. The house creaked and settled around me, and somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed midnight. The next morning hit me like a freight train. I'd barely slept, and my eyes felt full of sand. I was staring into my 3rd cup of coffee when my phone buzzed. Uncle Frank's name lit up the screen. Get dressed, he said, his voice hard as granite. Meet me at Jerry's diner by the courthouse. 30 minutes. I started to make an excuse, but he cut me off. Your grandfather didn't raise quitters, Jason. 30 minutes. The line went dead before I could respond. You ever notice how some people can make a suggestion sound like marching orders? That was Uncle Frank all over. Jerry's Diner was one of those places time forgot. Cracked vinyl booths, chrome everything, and coffee strong enough to dissolve a spoon. Uncle Frank was already there, occupying a corner booth like a general at his command post. He'd ordered for both of us. Black coffee. No nonsense. Show me everything, he said, as I slid into the booth. No, good morning, no small talk. That's what I always liked about Frank. He didn't waste time with social padding. I pulled out my folder. Access logs, inventory sheets, text messages, everything I'd collected. Frank spread them across the Formica table, moving his coffee cup to make room. The waitress raised an eyebrow, but kept her distance. Look here, Frank said, tapping the access log. Sarah visited the vault at 2:15 p.m. on Tuesday, but her Instagram shows her having lunch across town at 2:30. He pulled out his phone, showing me the post. Unless she's learned to teleport. She's lying about one of them, I finished, feeling something click into place. Exactly. Frank lined up bank statements next to the vault logs. David made a safe deposit box visit right after leaving the vault. Interesting timing. Wouldn't you say? I remembered my earlier resignation and felt my face flush. I should have caught these patterns. You were too close to it, Frank said, not unkindly. Grief does that. Makes you doubt yourself. He took a long sip of coffee. But patterns don't lie. Timestamps, bank visits, little inconsistencies. They all tell a story if you know how to read them. My breathing steadied as we worked. Frank had been a logistics officer in the Army. He knew how to break big problems into manageable pieces. We mapped everything on a legal pad. Who was where, when, and what they claimed afterward. I called Peterson, the estate lawyer, while Frank worked. To my surprise, Peterson agreed to keep parallel investigations going, while my preservation request wound through channels. Covers all our bases, he said. Meanwhile, my cousins were keeping their distance. Physically, at least. Online was another story. Sarah posted daily about missing dear grandpa with carefully filtered photos. David shared long posts about family legacy that never quite mentioned the watch. They're building their narrative, Frank said, studying his phone, making themselves look like the reasonable ones. Classic misdirection. The waitress refilled our cups a third time. Morning rush had come and gone while we worked, and now the lunch crowd was trickling in. Frank gathered the papers, folding them into a precise rectangle that disappeared into his jacket pocket. We've got legwork to do, he said, dropping cash on the table. Banks first, then the estate office. You up for it? For the first time in days, I felt something besides helpless anger. Yes, sir. Frank nodded once, decisive. Remember, follow the timestamps. People can lie, but time doesn't. We headed for the door, that simple instruction echoing in my head. Follow the timestamps. It wasn't much, but it was a plan. And sometimes that's all you need to keep going. You know what's funny about evidence? Sometimes the smallest details crack the biggest cases. Uncle Frank taught me that over the next few hours as we pieced together my cousin's movements like some twisted puzzle. Look at this, Frank said, spreading out his notebook at my kitchen table. Sarah posted a spa selfie at 3 p.m. last Thursday, but the vault log shows her signature at 2:45. I frowned at the timestamps. The spa is clear across town, at least 30 minutes with traffic. Exactly. Frank's pen tapped the paper. Either she's got a teleporter, or one of these timestamps is a lie. We dug deeper, cross-referencing everything we could find. David's LinkedIn showed him in meetings when the vault log had him accessing the estate. Sarah's Instagram stories placed her at lunch spots that didn't match her vault visits. Little discrepancies kept piling up around a suspicious 2-hour window last Thursday. I could smell the coffee going stale in my cup as Frank pulled out his phone. Let me try something. He called Maxwell's, the family jeweler we'd used for 3 generations. Put it on speaker so I could hear. No, Mr. Mercer, the clerk said. We haven't had any requests for watch valuation in the past month. Certainly nothing from the estate. Frank thanked her and immediately dialed First National, where my grandfather had done all his banking. Same answer. No appointments, no valuation requests, nothing that would explain legitimate handling of the watch. They didn't even try to cover their tracks, I muttered. People get sloppy when they think they're clever, Frank replied. The inventory clerk was next on our list. Young guy named Tommy, barely out of college. He shifted in his chair as we asked about the photography process. Well, He glanced at his computer screen. The watch drawer was empty when we got there. I figured someone had moved it, so I just noted, contents absent, and moved on. You documented the empty drawer? Frank leaned forward. Sure. Standard procedure. Empty or full, everything gets logged. Frank waited until we were in the hallway before allowing himself a small smile. Documented emptiness is still evidence, Jason. Maybe better than a photo of the watch itself. That sparked something in me. I spent the next hour crafting a memo for Peterson, the estate lawyer. Laid out every timestamp, every contradiction, every piece of supporting documentation. It felt like finally getting traction after days of spinning wheels. My phone rang just as I was saving the file. Peterson's number. Jason, he said, and something in his tone made my stomach clench. I've just heard from opposing counsel. Your cousins are pushing to have the watch classified as disputed property. They want it put up for auction, he continued. They're claiming it's to protect the item's value during probate proceedings. The word auction hit me like a physical blow. I could see it happening. My grandfather's watch, passed to some stranger with deep pockets, vanishing forever. The air felt too thick to breathe. Jason? Frank's voice cut through the fog. He must have heard my end of the call. Focus. Panic is a luxury we can't afford right now. I tried to steady myself, but my hands were shaking as I closed the memo file. My phone buzzed again. An email this time. The official auction notice, complete with a date just weeks away. They're trying to force our hand, Frank said, reading over my shoulder. Make us either buy it ourselves or watch it disappear. The dread sat heavy in my chest, competing with Frank's call for focus. I stared at the auction notice until the words blurred together, thinking about how my grandfather would handle this. But all I could hear was his voice, clear as day. This watch stays in our bloodline, Jason, no matter what. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Frank and I walked back into the estate office. My footsteps sank into that institutional beige carpet. You know the kind, probably older than half the staff here. The place had that after-hours emptiness that makes every sound feel louder than it should. We need to check the archives, Frank said to the estate manager. No preamble, just straight to business. That was Frank's way, direct as a hammer. The estate manager, Thompson was his name, looked up from his desk with the kind of expression you'd give a kid asking for a third helping of dessert. I've already explained our position on accessing records without proper authorization. This isn't about authorization, Frank replied, pulling out his reading glasses. This is about insurance retention requirements. Section 4.3 of your catastrophic loss prevention protocols, if I remember correctly. You should have seen Thompson's face twitch at that. Frank had spent 40 years managing corporate security. He knew exactly which buttons to push. The protocols require backup retention for any flagged security incidents, Frank continued, calm as could be. Minimum 7 years for insurance compliance. Thompson's jaw worked back and forth. I could practically hear his teeth grinding. Even if such backups exist, policy requires their preservation, Frank cut in, and their availability for review under supervised conditions. He paused. Let that sink in. We're happy to wait while you call legal to confirm. I've got to hand it to Frank. He knew exactly how to make bureaucracy work for us, instead of against us. After about 10 minutes of Thompson making calls and muttering about procedures, we found ourselves following an archivist named Martinez down a narrow hallway. She unlocked a workstation in what looked like a converted storage room. I'll need to document this access, she said, logging in. And I have to remain present throughout the search. Wouldn't have it any other way, Frank assured her. The directory structure that popped up on screen seemed endless. Fiscal years nested within fiscal years, each with dozens of subfolders. My throat got tighter with each click, thinking about that 2-week deletion window ticking away on the current system. Can you filter for flagged incidents? Frank asked, leaning forward slightly. Martinez nodded and typed in a few commands. The mess of folders condensed down to a single directory, dated the same day as our inventory visit. My heart started hammering against my ribs. That's the vault camera identifier, Martinez said, pointing to a subfolder code. VLT2C. When she clicked it open, there was just one file sitting there. An MP4, time-stamped exactly when we'd been doing the inventory. The air felt suddenly thick, like everyone in that small room had stopped breathing at once. Thompson appeared in the doorway, clutching a chain of custody form like it was keeping him afloat. This access needs to be documented, he insisted. But his voice had lost its edge. Every person present needs to sign. Of course, Frank said smoothly, taking the form. He signed it with deliberate care, then passed it to me. My signature looked shaky next to his steady hand. I couldn't take my eyes off that video file on the screen. 2 weeks of searching, of dead ends and bureaucratic walls, and here it was, just sitting there, waiting to be played. Martinez moved the cursor over the play icon, and I swear the hum of those fluorescent lights got louder. Frank's hand settled on my shoulder. Steady, reassuring. Thompson hovered by the door like he couldn't decide whether to stay or run. "Ready?" Martinez asked, her finger poised over the mouse button. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Everything we needed might be in that file, or nothing at all. Either way, we were about to find out. The video started playing, and my whole world narrowed down to that grainy security footage. There they were, my cousins, plain as day, standing by that drawer in the vault. Sarah reached in while Thomas kept glancing at the door. The timestamp matched our inventory visit perfectly. "Can you zoom in?" Frank asked quietly. Martinez adjusted the view, and my hands gripped the edge of the desk so hard my knuckles went white. There it was, Grandpa's gold pocket watch, gleaming even in the vault's fluorescent lighting. Sarah held it up to Thomas with this little smirk, and they both laughed. Then she dropped it into her oversized purse like it was nothing more than loose change. The footage kept looping, and each replay burned away any lingering doubt I'd had. The sick feeling in my stomach transformed into something harder, clearer. You know that moment when you finally see something you've known in your gut all along? That's what this was. "We'll need an official copy," Frank said, steady as ever. "Full chain of custody." Martinez nodded, already pulling up the export dialogue. "I'll need signatures from everyone present." She reached for a fresh form, and Thompson stepped forward with his pen like it physically pained him. "This doesn't leave this room until properly documented," he insisted, but his voice had lost that bureaucratic certainty. Funny how clear evidence can do that to people. While they handled the paperwork, I stepped into the hallway and called our lawyer. "We've got them," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Security footage, time-stamped, showing them taking the watch during inventory." The change in his tone was immediate, from professional patience to sharp focus. "Send me everything you have. I'll file an emergency motion to stop any auction proceedings." Papers rustled on his end. "We can get a hearing first thing tomorrow morning if I submit within the hour." Back in the archive room, Frank was supervising Martinez as she pulled still frames from key moments. The shot of Sarah slipping the watch into her purse was crystal clear. You could even see Thomas's satisfied grin. "Print those timestamps separately," Frank instructed, "and we need a certified copy of the access log showing authorized entries." I worked past midnight, assembling everything into a presentation that even a half-asleep judge couldn't ignore. Every tab in the binder told part of the story. The vault access records, the inventory documentation, statements from the clerk who'd noted the empty drawer, and those damning screenshots from the security footage. Frank made calls to the 2 other staff members who'd been present during inventory. "Just confirming the sequence of events," he told them. Their statements matched perfectly. Both remembered Sarah insisting on checking that particular drawer first. Around 1 a.m., I noticed the family group chat had gone silent. The cousins, who'd been posting smug little messages about resolving family disputes amicably all week, suddenly had nothing to say. That silence felt sharp, dangerous, like the quiet before a storm. I printed 3 identical binders, labeling each tab by hand. The physical act of organizing it all helped steady my nerves. Frank watched me from his chair, occasionally offering suggestions about order and presentation. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said quietly as I finished the last label. "Not just for finding the truth, but for how you went about it. The right way." I looked up at the darkened window, knowing the courthouse doors were waiting on the other side of that night. Everything we'd gathered, every screenshot, timestamp, and signature, would be tested in a matter of hours. The binders sat on my desk like ammunition, ready for morning. "Let's run through the sequence one more time," Frank suggested, pulling his chair closer. "A good case is only as strong as its presentation. I've sat through my share of tense meetings, but nothing quite prepares you for watching a judge settle into their chair while holding your family's honor in their hands." Judge Martinez was all business from the start. Neat robes, reading glasses positioned just so, case file already tagged with yellow markers. "Given the time-sensitive nature of this matter," she began, consulting her notes, "we'll proceed with focused presentations. Counsel?" Our lawyer stood, smooth as silk. "Your Honor, we have video evidence showing fraudulent removal of a designated heirloom during estate inventory." He gestured to the tech setting up the screen. The footage was preserved under standard insurance protocols. "Remember how I mentioned documenting everything? That obsession paid off. Our exhibits looked like a military operation. Each binder tab caught the fluorescent light as our lawyer walked the judge through the timeline. The cousins sat with their attorney, all three looking like they'd bitten into something sour. Sarah kept adjusting her silk scarf while Thomas studied his manicured nails. Their practiced composure cracked when the screen flickered to life. The vault footage started playing, and I swear the air got thicker. Even with the sound muted, you could read their body language clear as day. The shared looks, the casual way Sarah opened her purse, Thomas's little nod of approval. Their lawyer shot up like he'd been spring-loaded. "Objection, Your Honor. This footage was obtained without proper notice to all parties. Furthermore, the vault area carries an expectation of privacy during estate proceedings." Judge Martinez peered over her glasses. "Counselor, are you familiar with the standard retention policies for secured areas in financial institutions?" "Yes, Your Honor, but then you're aware that insurance requirements mandate backup storage of flagged security recordings?" She tapped her pen twice. "Let's establish foundation. Is the archivist present?" Martinez, the archivist, not the judge, stepped forward and took the oath. She explained the backup system with the kind of precise detail that only comes from years of working with records. Every policy number, every retention schedule, every flagging protocol, it all lined up with the manual she'd brought. "And this particular file was automatically flagged due to," the judge prompted. "The inventory access triggered our catastrophic loss protocols, Your Honor. Any entry involving multiple parties and high-value items receives automatic backup status." I watched the cousin's lawyer scribbling furiously, probably trying to find some procedural angle to block what everyone could see plain as day on that screen. When my turn came to speak, I kept it simple. The watch wasn't just gold and gears. It was every Sunday afternoon in Grandpa's workshop. Every lesson about doing things right instead of doing them easy. But I didn't go for drama. Just stated the facts about his wishes and the inscription he'd had engraved inside the case. Judge Martinez held up her hand to pause the video right as Sarah's hand moved toward her purse. The frame froze with crystal clarity, the watch gleaming, their expressions caught in mid-laugh. The silence in that courtroom felt like it had physical weight. "Counsel," she said finally, "I'll need a brief addressing 2 points. The admissibility of automated backup footage and the elements of fraudulent misrepresentation in estate proceedings." She checked her calendar. "Submit by 8 a.m. tomorrow. We'll reconvene at 10. Our lawyer nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor. We'll include all relevant exhibits and citations." The cousins were first out the door when she called recess, their heels clicking rapidly down the marble corridor. Their lawyer trailed behind, already on his phone. Frank's hand landed on my shoulder as we gathered our materials. "One more round," he said quietly. "You've got this." I watched the bailiff check his watch, 4:30 p.m. That gave us 15 hours to put everything we had into formal legal language. The judge's words echoed in my head. "Submit by 8 a.m. tomorrow." Looking at the stack of exhibits we'd need to reference, I knew exactly how I'd be spending my night. The afternoon light slanted through our lawyer's office windows while we built our case. Every surface disappeared under stacks of exhibits and timelines. You know that intense focus you get when you're racing against time but can't afford mistakes? That's where we lived for those hours. "We need the chain of custody records front and center," Frank said, spreading photos across the conference table. "Shows we did everything by the book." Our lawyer, Mike, nodded without looking up from his laptop. His fingers hadn't stopped moving since we'd left court. The judge gave us a roadmap. Admissibility first, then fraud. Clean and clinical. I'd forgotten how familiar this felt. The coffee getting cold, the sleeves rolled up, the quiet intensity of getting things exactly right. Just like those nights in Grandpa's workshop when a restoration project had to be perfect. "Here's the timeline," I said, sliding over my notes. Every vault entry, every communication, every denial. Cross-referenced with the security logs. The phone kept buzzing. Cousins working the family phone tree, trying to spin their story before the footage spoke for itself. I caught fragments through the wall. Misunderstanding, and family harmony, and overly dramatic. My jaw clenched. But Frank caught my eye and shook his head. "Let them talk." Around 7, the estate manager's email arrived with the chain of custody receipt. Wouldn't look at us in person, but that stamped document said more than any conversation could. Mike wove it into the brief like the final piece of a puzzle. "Read this section," he said, turning his screen. The legal language was precise as a surgeon's knife. Respondents' recorded actions demonstrate knowing concealment and subsequent denial, satisfying all elements of fraudulent misrepresentation. Frank reviewed each page with the same attention he'd once given mission briefings. "Tighten this paragraph," Less emotion, more facts. Let the judge see it without us pointing. My eyes kept drifting to the stills from the footage. Sarah's practiced casualness as she opened her purse. Thomas's smirk as he glanced at the camera he thought would never catch them. The watch. Grandpa's watch. Gleaming one last time before they made it disappear. The filing confirmation came through at 11:47 p.m. Mike looked like he'd aged a year, but satisfied. It's comprehensive. Now we wait. I couldn't face the drive home, so I crashed on the office couch in my suit. Fitful sleep, full of ticking clocks and empty drawers. The coffee maker's timer woke me at 5. Bless whoever programmed it. The first sip burned away the fog, and I caught my reflection in the window, wrinkled but ready. Frank was waiting on the courthouse steps at 7:30, military punctual. Just nodded when he saw me. That nod carried decades of standing together, of knowing which battles matter. By 9:45, the gallery filled with faces I recognized from family gatherings. Aunts who'd always supported the cousins now sat perfectly straight, eyes forward. Uncles who'd laughed at their jokes studied their phones with sudden fascination. The air felt charged, like before a storm breaks. The clerk moved through her routine with practiced efficiency. All rise. Judge Martinez took the bench exactly at 10. The brief already open before her. My heart hammered against my ribs as she lifted the first page. The cousins huddled with their lawyer at the next table. Sarah's knuckles white around a leather portfolio. Thomas kept adjusting his tie like it was trying to strangle him. Their confidence from yesterday had evaporated in the night. The whole room seemed to hold its breath as the judge began to read. Judge Martinez read with the kind of deliberate pace that makes every word land like a hammer. The court finds clear and convincing evidence of fraudulent misrepresentation by the respondents. Her glasses caught the fluorescent light as she looked up. The security footage, properly preserved and authenticated, shows deliberate theft, followed by coordinated deception. Ever had that moment when vindication hits so hard it almost winds you? That's what it felt like sitting there, watching justice click into place like the gears in Grandpa's beloved timepieces. Furthermore, she continued, the respondents' subsequent attempts to force an auction represent a continuation of their fraudulent conduct. She gestured to the exhibits. The chain of custody is impeccable, and the evidence is unambiguous. Sarah's perfect posture crumbled. Thomas's tie fidgeting turned frantic. Their lawyer started scribbling, but we all knew it was just theater now. Given these findings, the court hereby bars the respondents from any inheritance rights under the will. Judge Martinez's voice carried that final judgment weight. The motion for auction is denied, and the court orders immediate return of the gold pocket watch to the rightful beneficiary, Jason Mercer. Frank's hand found my shoulder, steady as always. The cousin's lawyer tried some last-minute objection, but the judge shut him down with a look that could have frozen coffee. Bailiff, please retrieve Exhibit A from evidence. I watched the bailiff move to a secured cabinet, emerging with a sealed envelope and a small velvet pouch. Each step he took felt like time stretching out, like those moments before Grandpa would reveal some new lesson in the workshop. The pouch settled into my palm with a familiar weight. Warm, like it remembered me. I didn't need to open it right then. Some moments deserve privacy. You want to know the crazy part? By the time we hit the courthouse steps, the family grapevine was already humming. My phone buzzed with texts from aunts who'd always known something was off about those two. Uncle George's message just said, "Your grandfather would be proud." Someone, probably Aunt Helen, she never could resist drama, had shared the security footage in the extended family group chat. The cousins' carefully crafted image shattered in real time, one horrified reaction after another. Thieves in the family? Did you see them laughing? How could they? Frank and I drove home in the kind of silence you earn after a long battle. No need for words when justice speaks for itself. The late afternoon sun painted everything in gold, like one of those perfect autumn days Grandpa used to love. My hands were steady unlocking the front door, steady opening the cabinet, steady setting the watch back in its place in the display case. The lamp on my desk caught the engraving just right, throwing that familiar glint across the room, like a nod from the past, saying everything was back where it belonged. You know what Grandpa always said? Greed destroys bloodlines, but honor rebuilds them. Standing there, watching that gold gleam settle into its rightful place, I finally understood exactly what he meant. The watch ticked softly in its case, marking time in a house that felt like home again.